Hi, Sheroes and Heroes. Today it's just me because we are going to have a little fairy tale time. I will tell you a short fairy tale to show you how you can use some of those things I'm going to do. Some of those, one could say. Methods I'm going to use to make my performance more vivid. Now, I chose a fairy tale because I think that fairy tales are very lively and with a lot of pictures, mental pictures and images that we can use to make it more. The story more vivid, so to say. But it's not only for fairy tales that we can use it. We can also use it for our own personal stories. So the fairy tale I want to present to you today is Cinderella, according to the Brothers Grimm. And here's how it goes. Once upon a time, there lived a very rich man whose wife had just died. Yet before 1 year had passed, he had taken another woman to be his bride, his new bride. This man had one daughter who was dear and lovely, and every day she went to her mother's grave and she knelt and she prayed and she wept. But her new stepmother had also brought 2 stepsisters into the household, and they were very fair from the outside, but nasty and dark from the inside. And now there came a hard time, a difficult time for the stepchild. Because her stepsisters, whenever they saw her, they said, "Must the stupid goose sit with us in the parlor?" Or, "Out with the kitchen maid!" And they took her by the hand and they led her into the kitchen, and then she had to work day in and day out. And when night fell, she didn't even have a bed to sleep in. She had to sleep next to the oven in the ashes. And because she was so dirty, they called her Cinderella. Now there came a time when the king proclaimed a festival that was to last 3 days, so that his son could choose a bride. And the stepsisters were very pleased, and they called for Cinderella to help them dress, comb our hair, brush our shoes, fasten our knuckles, fasten our buckles. We go to the festival at the king's castle. And Cinderella did all these things. But she wept and was sad, because she also wanted to go to the festival at the king's castle. And so she went to her stepmother and she begged her, Dear stepmother, may I not also go to the festival?" But the stepmother just looked at her. "Cinderella, it's simply no use. You will not come with us because you have no dress and you cannot dance. We should be ashamed of you." And so they all went without her. And when they had all left Cinderella, she went to her mother's grave and she knelt down. There grew a beautiful hazelnut tree, and it was dark, and the moon shone down upon her through the branches of the tree, and a subtle wind was blowing through the leaves, and it was whispering softly to her. And she knelt down and she prayed, "Shake and quiver, little tree, throw gold and silver over me." And down from the branches came flying a bird, and it threw down a golden dress and golden and silver embroidered slippers. And she took up those beautiful slippers. They were so tiny and delicate, and they shone brightly in the moonlight. And she had never seen such beautiful slippers. So she pulled them on, and she pulled the dress over her head, and everything fit perfectly. And so she went and she came to the king's ball, to the festival. And there nobody recognized her, not even her own stepmother and stepsisters. They all saw her and they whispered, "Oh, it must be the most beautiful foreign princess." But the prince, when he saw her, he immediately wanted to dance with her. So he took her by the hand and they danced the whole night through. And he wanted to dance with nobody else. And when somebody else came to ask her, he said, "This is my dance partner." But when the time had become very late and Cinderella saw her family leave already, she slipped away from the prince before he could ask her who she was and whom she belonged to. And she ran all the way back to the grave, and she pulled off the dress and she pulled off the slippers and she laid it all down, and the bird came flying down and took it all away again. And thus it went the next days too. As soon as her relatives had left, she went to the grave and she knelt down and she prayed, "Shake and quiver, little tree, throw gold and silver over me." And down came flying the bird, and it threw down the golden dress and the golden and silver embroidered slippers. And she pulled them on and they fit perfectly. And she went to the ball. And when the prince saw her, he immediately took her by the hand and he danced with her the whole night through. And he wanted to dance with nobody else. And when somebody else came to ask her, he said, "This is my dance partner." And every time Cinderella left and slipped away. But on the last day, the third night, she lost one slipper on the stairs. But she didn't notice. She ran and ran all the way back to the grave, and she pulled up the dress and the bird came flying down and took it away. And then she noticed that she had only one slipper left. One of her beautiful slippers, beautiful, tiny, delicate slippers that glittered so enchanted in the moonlight. The only memory she would ever keep from her beautiful nights with the prince. The prince, meanwhile, he found the slipper, and the next day he rode from house to house, knocking on every door. And whenever the door was open, he said, "Whoever fits this shoe shall be my wife." But nobody could fit the shoe. It was too tiny and delicate. And so he rode on, knocking on every door, saying, "Whomever fits this shoe shall be my wife." Still nobody fit the shoe. Then at last, when it had become late, he arrived at Cinderella's doorstep and he knocked. And when it was open, he said, "Whomever fits this shoe shall be my wife." And the stepsisters were very pleased because they had beautiful feet. So the first one tried the slipper, but she couldn't make her toe fit. It just wouldn't fit. And so her mother finally handed her a knife and she said, "Cut off a piece of your toe. When you first are queen, you don't have to go by foot anymore. And so she did. And she cut off a piece of her toe and she pulled on the slipper and it finally fit. And the prince, when he saw her, he took her and lifted her onto his horse and he rode away. But when he passed the hazelnut tree, there were two white doves who called out, "Rock-a-dee-goo, rock-a-dee-goo, there's blood in the shoe. The shoe is too small. The right braid is still awaiting the coup." And then the prince looked down and he saw the blood oozing from the slipper and he turned his horse and he rode back and delivered this daughter back. So the other daughter tried on the slipper. Her toe fit very well, but then her heel, her bloody heel, couldn't fit into the slipper. And so her mother handed her a knife too. "Cut off a piece of your heel. When you first are queen, you don't have to go by foot anymore." And so she did. And she cut off a piece of her heel, and it hurt, and she pushed her foot into the slipper, and it fit. And when the prince saw her, he lifted her onto the horse and rode away. But when they passed the hazelnut tree, the white doves called out again, "Rock-a-dee-goo, rock-a-dee-goo, there's blood in the shoe. The shoe is too small. The right braid is still awaiting the coup." And so the prince looked down and he saw the blood oozing from the slipper and he turned around and delivered this daughter too. And then he turned to the man and he said, "Don't you have another daughter?" And the man said, "My lord, only a dirty old Cinderella from my late wife." And the stepmother said, "Oh, but she's much too dirty to be seen in polite company." But the prince indeed wanted to see her. And so Cinderella was called, and she washed first her hands and her face clean, and then she tried on the slipper. And as it had done all the time, it fit perfectly. And so she pulled on the other slipper as well. And when she rose, the prince, delighted, recognized his dancing partner. "This is my dancing partner." And he took her and lifted her onto the horse, and they rode away, leaving the stepmother and stepsister quite pale with anger. And when they passed the hazelnut tree, the white doves called out, "Rock-a-dee-goo, rock-a-dee-goo, no blood in the shoe. The shoe is not too small. The right braid has answered the call." And they flew down and they lit on Cinderella's shoulders. And they rode all the way up to the castle and they got married. And from that day on, Cinderella lived happily ever after with her prince and her slipper. So there we have a fairy tale that you all probably know in one way or the other. And what I want to direct your focus to is the way I told this story, and the way you can play with the characters that you are building, even though you are telling a personal story, sharing one of your own stories. And this is, on the one hand, the characters. I build the characters on the one hand with the voice by either changing the voice, making it very high pitched, like the stepmother, or very very soft, like Cinderella, or a little bit pompous, like the prince, my dancing partner. And you can really play with this. And then something else is the pacing of the story, which you can play with too. You can make it very slow, like when you're wandering, you look at the shoe, the golden slippers, how it glittered in the moonlight. And you can also put a little whisper into it, or play with volume as well. Or you can make it really, really fast. And he recognized her, and he said, "This is my dancing partner." And he lifted her onto his horse, and he rode away with her, and they got married. And you can also play, apart from the voice, you can also play with your gestures, and you can play with your posture. For example, your gestures, you can use it like as if you are holding the slipper. Oh, this is a lovely golden slipper. Or you can play with your posture when you're impersonating different characters. For example, you play the stepmother. I made her very much a head person, with her head in the clouds, looking down her nose at people. And the prince, I make very much a chest person, very confident in his own abilities. And Cinderella, very much a little bit devoted, a little bit much out of the hips. She's like this hip person, very much like trying to be small. And whatever you can play with this, whatever character you want to impersonate, and whatever you want them to look like, to be seen as. And some other thing you can play with, I did this a little bit with you can play with your sounds, so to speak. You can, for example, this is the prince riding, and this is the prince knocking, and the bird is whooshing down. It flies down, and you can really put that into your voice, that this bird is flying in a way. And there was some. You can also play with the point of view. For example, you are the narrator. You have a narrator that you choose for the story. Mine, I tried to make a little bit ironic, a little bit laughing at the characters, but it really depends on the story. And then you can, even though you are telling the story, you can put this point of view into the narrator. For example, and the stepsisters were very pleased, even though they are not talking. You can put this very pleased, this feeling, this emotion into the character. You are still the narrator, but you're very much going into this character. This will make it more lively. There are a lot of things to say about this, and a lot of things you can try out, and just give yourself permission to try it out, permission to play a little bit without criticizing yourself too much. Try to record yourself and listen to it, and try to overact too, because afterwards, when you're listening to your recording, you might find out that it is actually very, very compelling. At least some of the things are very compelling. And you will also see that something might not be as ridiculous as you thought it to be at first, because then you are not so much in your own head anymore. So this is where I want to end this. There will at some point come much more about rehearsing and telling stories, and I will also share personal stories in the future, but I think fairy tales are very, very useful to just play with characters. You don't have to come up with the story, you can just make it your own story. So this is it for today. Thank you for listening. It was quite a long video this time, so I hope you stuck with me. I hope you got something out of this, and see you next time.